Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Farrell. I'm a studio art major from Plainsboro, New Jersey. Okay. I think that one of the things I want to do before I jump into discussing the actual works that we see on these walls here is begin with a bit about the way in which my upbringing has affected my creative process, the way in which I make art, the way in which I interpret art. So I'm part of a big family of 5 kids. I have 2 older sisters and I have 2 younger brothers. And so we're also all very, very close in age. We skipped like 1 year, but it's pretty much straight up. If you're in the atrium right now, room 117 right now, I'm sure you would notice a bunch of people who look just like me in one of the rows. So that's them. And so family and of siblings, especially when they're that close in age to you, is really they're like your peers in a way. So when you're a young child and you're raised with a bunch of siblings, the creative energy that you have is just bouncing off of each other. And so, okay. And just let me know at any point if the audio is messed up. Thank you. So it's through that network of family that I've been able to explore imagination and creativity and grow as an artist. In my younger years, it was just constantly making stories, drawing, painting, all of that. And another part of my upbringing that it took me a while to recognize has affected my artwork is I was raised in a religious family. And I think that my eager acceptance of religion at a young age led to my interpretations of myths, fairy tales, folklore being very literal. So when you're a little kid, you don't really have that sense of interpreting things figuratively or maybe like making symbolic connections. But you take everything at face value, which is something that is one of the beauties of childhood and that innocence, right? But so it was that idea of taking everything very literally. All my daydreams, the scenarios I thought up, the stories that I read, I was imagining them really happening. And I think that's I'm thankful for being in that family unit and raised in that environment. I think that there are certainly flaws that can be exposed within organized religion and all that. But I think one of the things that organized religion does do, even from a non-religious sense, is it paints or it positions a landmark of history. And so mythologies, and especially religious mythologies, create these sort of tapestries of history and morality and the ways in which they intersect and the ways in which they converge and then diverge from one another. And what that does is it sort of leads to it exposes 2 things. It exposes the differences between cultures and how they interpret mythologies, but it also exposes the similarities that we have between cultures, questions that have been long written down, questions that people are still worrying about today. How do we exist in the world? Why do we exist? What's the purpose of existence? Sort of philosophical stuff, but myths have been a way in which we attempt to sort of answer those questions. So literary, philosophical, humanity stuff, I guess, aside, I'm going to start talking about, I'm going to start with my artwork. Briefly. So the Apocrypha is a similarly religious title. It refers to scriptural by the Catholic Church at the time. I find very interesting. It poses the question of who has the authority to deny myths and the authority to promote myths or affirm mythology. And I think to think about that and wrestling with those questions, artist practice is of this? How does this happen? How does this originate? And so one of the things I realized within this process is that mythologies, no matter how outlandish they are, they all originate in the mundane. They start with stories, and then through the narrative power of reimagination, re-envisioning, and devotion, mythologies grow. They grow into things that can be entirely unrecognizable. So that's one of the things that I was looking to expose with these pieces, which is called The Creation of Myth. This is about how myths originate and how they come into being. And so I'm not going to walk through the artwork all the way, but the artwork starts with this dog in this mundane situation. And by the end, it's been transformed into this iconographic, almost like terrifying piece of religion. And so that's just a thing that I was looking to expose through humor and whimsy. I think another thing that is that's useful to recognize about these is I think the creation of myth is similar to the game of telephone that you would have between people. So it can start with one thing, but over time it becomes more and more garbled and more and different as different cultures interpret it, as it moves through different cultures and different people, and different values are applied to it. So that's the general thought behind this series right here. So I've talked about it a bit. I'm going to pivot over to this wall here. Okay. So we talked a little bit about how myths originate, but I think it's also useful to go back to the role of mythology and what mythology accomplishes. So myths are meant to, the way I've seen them through my artwork and my research, they're affirmative forces. So they affirm people's experiences. They can often affirm or uphold biases or prejudices, and they offer answers to questions, as I mentioned before, of an existential nature. So one of the things that I think led me to these pieces is, well, what is mythology protecting us from? And I think that the main thing that mythology does or keeps us from is chaos. So chaos in societies, disruption. Mythology has a very real and tangible role of keeping societies in line and in check. And so the ways in which cross-culturally chaos is represented is through demons. We see that in ancient Near Eastern mythology. We see that in Scandinavian mythology and Inuit mythology. Almost every culture has these representations, these manifestations of chaos, and they're called demons. And so one of the things that I was trying to do was look at the ways in which this chaos exists and then embody it in my own way. So, and when I'm talking about chaos, I don't really mean to refer to the metaphysical sense. Chaos is embodied in real human traits. So it's embodied in jealousy and greed, ego, malice, vindictiveness, terror. It's embodied in that way. It's not a far away thing that we're just grasping at. It's real and it's all around us in a really interesting way. And so I chose to create these whimsical, outlandish, sort of surreal demons, but place them in environments that we're generally comfortable with or aware of. By grounding them in the real world, I'm further underscoring the point of the fact that these are human traits, and that's what's being represented within these works. So I have those. We're going to do a 360 over to this wall. Okay. Great. Okay, so this is the last one I'm going to discuss. This diverges a bit from the religious idea of mythologies and it sort of embraces and leans into the idea of mythologies as narrative structures. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier on was I've had this obsession with narrative, and I've wanted to be or utilize artistic agency to create narratives. So in June of 2020, I drew a panel of a comic, and then every day from June 2020 to February of 2022, I would draw a panel a day of this story. It wasn't planned out. I would do it in a very spontaneous way. And what I looked to do was create a narrative and just see where it went. And I mentioned mythologies often originate in that way. So another point about mythologies in religious and secular, in a secular sense, is that they don't always have, they're not always about metaphysics. They often incorporate cultural archetypes, tropes, like narrative predictability. And that's one of the things that I was looking to interrogate and poke fun of during this creation. So I was looking at very popular tropes that we know in pop culture, such as, you know, the washed up quarterback, biker club, the small town, the sort of outlandish sea monster, and you know, the corrupt government, corrupt police officers, and use that as a way to poke fun at those and expose some truths about themes such as toxic masculinity and ego and violence, and do that in a whimsical way, if that's possible. And so the creation of this was really interesting to me. I was so invested in it when I was doing it that I had never really seen them all at once. Stepping back from them, I think they offer something that is a mess in an interesting way, where it's characters are introduced and then plot lines break off and split off, and some plot lines die, some arise, you know, and so it results in the creation of a story that is all over the place, but in a way that I think is valuable and interesting. So in that sense, I was really defy mythological narrative structure by creating tangential stories that were semi-connected and then ending it on a note that had no real conclusion with the rest of the characters. So that's basically what I'm going to talk about as far as the artwork goes. I want to rattle off a few brief thank yous. It'll be a whole bunch of thank yous. So, but I want to thank obviously the art history department and the entire art department. I'm sure I'm forgetting some people, but with Corey, those have had an immense impact on my art, and I've been privileged enough to take classes with all of them. I also want to acknowledge the people who are with me in this room. Leah did a fantastic job helping me set up, keeping me on track. When it came down to the wire, Leah was there. I want to also thank David. David was immensely helpful, and Marissa as well. All of the gallery interns were great. I want to give a shout out to Oliver. He was here with me on that night, just working and measuring and all that. I want to also thank all of the studio art majors. Their words and thoughts and critiques have really helped me develop my artwork, especially Sophia, who helped me set this up and really helped me determine how I wanted the gallery to look, and Pierce, who's my studio mate. I think we draw a lot of artwork and artistic influence from one another. So let me think who else. I'm sure I'm missing some people. There are a few students who really helped me out with this. A lot of the formatting, especially of these on grids, is a mathematical or numerical thing. That's something I don't do well at all. I'm comfortable with that. But so I had the help of people such as my friend Kyle Kowaleski and Miguel Donato, who really helped me with the formatting of these. That's just about all the thank yous I have to give. I would also just like to thank, obviously, my friends and my family. There have been a lot of people who have influenced my work, and from famous artists to classmates and other figures. I think though the person who's really influenced me the most in my artwork has been my mom. Just being able to grow up with her and experience the stories with her, and she has a creative mindset as well. So I want to thank my parents and my friends, and thank you everyone who's here in person or on Zoom. I'm super happy that you guys came through, and I think that's amazing. Before we open up the gallery to be walked through, we're going to answer some questions. So yes, thank you very much, everyone.
Richard, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Hello. So I know you talked about inspiration a little bit at the end there, and you talked about religion throughout. I was wondering if you had any artists, like multiple or even just a singular one, who influenced, both your religious art and your narrative art. And then furthermore, on the narrative art, that's something that you really wanted to do throughout last year. Is that something that you're going to look to continue to do post-graduation?
Yes, thank you, Joe. So it's a great question, especially about the artistic influences. So two of the foremost influences that I think contributed to my work were Sando Burke and Marcel Dzama. Sando Burke very often uses pen and ink to create religious references in modern times. A lot of apocalyptic work. It'll be like a minotaur standing on top of a subway or sitting on top of a gas station. And so this kind of stuff, incorporating religion and the metaphysical with this idea of realistic art and realism. Marcel Dzama also, I'm happy you brought this up. He's an artist who does surreal, whimsical work. It's a lot of time, it takes a lot of influences from cross-cultural mythologies. And one of the things in which he says is, oftentimes we use whimsy as a escape mechanism or as a way to avoid talking about what's serious. But whimsy in his art, and I think in my art as well, is actually not a way to dilute the story, but to deepen the story. And I think ambiguity does the same thing. Ambiguity doesn't provide less, it actually can provide more. So when you see this crazy scenario happening, it can hint at all sorts of things to the audience. I think I would definitely love to answer that third part. I would definitely love to continue narrative art. I think it's really such a beautiful art form in that it can connect multiple people's experiences. It can be shared with people, and you can essentially step into the art and move through it in that way. So I hope that answers those questions. Thank you so much.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, perfect. How did you decide which works to print digitally versus showing the original drawing?
Oh, yes. So this is something that I had actually was very much in the deciding process of, especially last year. Last year and the year before that, I did a lot of animation. So I would make animated GIFs and music videos and all that. But I think one of the ways in which I decided to change that is I love digital art, and I think it's a beautiful thing. It's accessible. Everyone can learn, and it flattens the learning curve in a great way. But I also love the physicality of art. That's been something from a young age when I would have a crayon or a paintbrush and was scrawling. Like that physicality of it, that real experience really made it the way what it was to me. And so if I could create art digitally and transfer it onto a tangible piece, to me, that's just so much more influential, and I think that I really want to continue to do. Yeah, we can take a couple more.
Hey, Richard, it's Isaac.
Isaac, hello.
Well, first I want to say I've had the pleasure and honor to see you grow as an artist. I remember sophomore year, we would sit in your dorm, you would show me your drawings, and I'd be like, yeah, that's cool. And it's it's weird. But now it's just you've really blown me away. I think you've become a force to be reckoned with. And this question might be kind of vague, but I'm really wondering, when I see your pieces, there's so much bizarre beauty in them. Like, I'm just like, what is going on here? So with something that's so composed, but at the same time, just so wild and out of the box, I'm thinking, what's the thought process here? How do you get inspired? Like,
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. That's something that has been central to my art, of creating wild scenes that don't maybe make much sense, but trying to attend to them with as much carefulness as possible. I think when you do that, it creates a position in the work that's really interesting to the viewer, because you're seeing something that is outlandish and absurd, but it's attended to in that way. That's one of the things that really evocative about art. I think Ralph Steadman's one of those examples where he'll have splatters across the page, but then he'll have like intricate line work on the other end. And so the thought process was, I want to make these scenes, I want to ground these scenes, not in realism, but in like maybe magical realism is the right term for it. I want to ground these scenes in that. But I have to do that by creating representational and semi-realistic work. And that posed a challenge, but it was a very, very rewarding experience. So yeah, thank you so much for that question. That's great.
Hey, Richard, it's Hunter. Got another one for you. So you've talked a lot about your Christian inspirations, but like what other traditions of mythology did you draw on for this exhibit and like your work generally?
Yeah, so one of I had mentioned briefly secular mythology, and I think maybe it would benefit from me expanding on that a little more. So mythology, of course, is not just religious. It works across cultures in different ways. It's not just even metaphysical. So I was also looking at a lot of, this is a kind of fun thing I was to research, was like cryptids. So Bigfoot, like the Mothman, and those sorts of those creatures that have worked their way into American pop culture and mythology in whatever way. And those are central themes throughout this series here. And I have you can maybe recognize them in some of the other works too. I was also influenced by, there were a bunch of different other like religious mythologies that influenced my artwork. Like there's Chinese mythology, there's Slavic paganism, there's Scandinavian work, a lot of like Christian woodcut style that I drew from. And that research component was to me one of the most interesting and exhilarating parts of creating this artwork. So thank you for that question.
Hey, Richard, it's Blanche.
Blanche, hello.
Hey, with digital artwork, you have a lot of manipulation with size and scale, especially how you can print things. And I was just wondering if you could talk to us about the kind of viewer relationship that you wanted to manifest in that gallery space, just given that you could have printed it so big or you could have printed it so small. I just wanted to see the intention behind that.
That's a great question. Yeah, I could have went bigger with all of these pieces, being that they are digital and you can just easily scale them up with the click of a button. But I think that to underscore the point of realism and the point of connecting this to the world that we're in, I want there to be a sense of intimacy, where if you were to stand on that end of the gallery, you couldn't read this. To read this and interpret a story. And so I think offering that these mini universes which you have to look into is something that has been a huge driving factor in my artwork. I never want to, I think if it's too large, it can be grand, but I love the coming in to look at something and noticing new things every time. I think that relates back to my point about narratives. The artwork itself, inside the artwork, there are narratives when you start noticing more things. That's a great question. Thank you, Blanche.
Hey, Richard, it's Sam. I was just curious about getting into the habit of doing a panel a day for almost 2 years. Did you find that difficult? Did you do them do you get into like a habit of doing it at a certain time each day? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
That's waiting for this question. I wanted to bring it up within the main part of the talk. So the way in which I did this was, the way in which I counted the day was before I fall asleep, I'm doing a panel. So it wasn't I had to do it by midnight. so some of these are done at like, it's a late night, it's a night out. I come home, I'm like, well, all right, I gotta do one of these. And it can be tough sometimes. It can be really actually grueling, but when I was looking at it and imagining, okay, this is something that is novel and that can be traced throughout time. It's almost like a journal in a way. There are certain panels here that I remember the thing that happened on that day. I remember the summer of the day my dog died, the panel I drew that day, the panel I drew on, the day of, the panel on Halloween, all these. So there's like a journalistic quality to it that I tried to think of it in that way. I thought like, this is going to be ultimately good. The ones that are painful or stressful or arduous right now are going to be they're not going to matter in relation to the ones that you spend time on and ones you're proud of. And now when I look at it all at once, I think it does come together in a way that I am proud of. But yeah, the process of doing it was certainly hard, but one that had a lot of reward.
Hey, Richard. So this is Sophia. But I was wondering how, like, so in junior capstone, you kind of started with this like animation and movement time-based work, and now you're doing the more still 2D work, but there's still this really strong, central focus point of storytelling. And I was wondering what drew you like technically and conceptually to do storytelling in this sort of format instead, and what kind of advantages and disadvantages you see now that you maybe did or didn't have before?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that is an advantage, I think digital art is, animation especially, is so unique because it can tell a story very quickly. But I also wanted to sort of play around with different ideas of digital storytelling. So that's what this is, and this is still done digitally, but it's obviously printed out in a still format. And I think one of the things that I would just refer back to is the point about I want things to feel the way they felt when I was really drawn to art. I was drawn to art through storybooks, through painting with my family, my mom when I was younger, and that's something I wanted to return to. I love animation. I'm not done with animation. I think I'm going to keep doing that to some extent, but the traditional artwork and printing things out and doing things in pen and ink gives that sense of tangibility and helps me return to the ideas that really drew me to art in the first place. Thank you, Sophia. All good? All right. If that's all the questions we have, guys, thank you so much for coming. And I guess the gallery will be open. Thank you, guys.